Now let's come to my favorite discussion, which is, so here's a guy who's now made sure that he can live wherever he wants, totally tax-free, get a second and third passport, and so a great success story of someone whose life is now a lot less burdensome because he chose to go where he's treated best. It is another Nomad Capitalist case study. We're walking through real clients who got real results and encountered some of the real challenges that people don't imagine when they are going offshore and creating their Nomad Capitalist lifestyle. I'm Andrew Henderson, joined by Yelena Sivchev, Irena Pergamet, who handle our strategy department in terms of making clients' plans, figuring out all the pieces and how they work together, figuring out stuff people didn't realize they needed to do, as well as things they didn't realize they could get, as well as Irena, who executes plans and goes out and makes it happen. So welcome back to both of you. We had a client who was 45 years old, living in Puerto Rico, had had enough of Puerto Rico. Tell me what this client came looking for.
Well, I see one of the first goals that he wanted to achieve is move out of Puerto Rico and sever ties with the United States.
Why move out of Puerto Rico?
Well, while Puerto Rico sounds good for tax benefits to U.S. citizens, it's also kind of a lifestyle choice, and you have to actually commit to spending time there, which not a lot of people want to. He did that for a couple of years, and then he just decided it's not for him anymore.
Which, by the way, is fine. You can go down there, you can bring in your Bitcoin at 10,000, sell them before you leave at 50,000, or bring in your company worth 10 million, sell it for 50 million, then leave. I mean, you can make a bunch of tax savings, go back to the mainland, enjoy your life a little bit wealthier. But for people who are looking for long-term savings, I found that most people over the years are always like trying to cut corners on Puerto Rico. It's kind of like, I don't want to move overseas, I really don't want to expatriate, but like there's this middle step that sounds like it kind of sucks.
Yeah, so I think like in that regard, Puerto Rico could be a great stepping stone. So not a long-term solution.
It's a good stepping stone sometimes, yeah.
Not a long-term solution necessarily, but can it be a good stepping stone to actually severing ties with the United States permanently?
I do think though, I mean, depending on where you're from, and we'll talk about his family and how that played a role in where he moved here. If I'm from Ohio, I feel like moving to Ireland, for example, is less of a culture shock, even though it's a different country, than moving to Puerto Rico. People kind of think it's because it's this U.S. territory that it's somehow less of an adjustment, and he found that not to be the case with it used to be Act 2022, now Act 60.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when they hear Puerto Rico, it kind of gives them comfort, and they want to go there because it's still U.S. territory, so they're not going away for like very far away or for a long time. They can still come back to the United States, but it's also kind of a state where they speak a different language, they have a bit of a different culture. Obviously, your kids...
They're sick of all the people coming in and living in their island.
Yes. They are not always kind of open-minded towards U.S. citizens coming down there.
And the slowest place. I mean, we've had the big boss here talk about it. We've had Jeremy who does our events. I mean, it is one of the most lethargic places to like go to the bank. I mean, just cancel your whole day.
Correct, and even just getting the approval for the benefits can take up to a year.
So obviously we help people get Act 60 in Puerto Rico, and he is involved. One of his deals is cryptocurrency, and that's, if you're not going to give up U.S. citizenship, really the one game in town if you want tax savings on capital gains and passive income, which is probably why I went there. But you're saying, hey, listen, if you can live in Puerto Rico, it's probably more of a culture shock than some foreign countries. All right, now he wants to, step 2, renounce U.S. citizenship. He's determined, I don't need this place anymore.
Correct. I mean, they personally were not opposed to Spanish-speaking countries, but Puerto Rico, as I said, lifestyle was just not for them anymore.
If you're going to choose Spanish-speaking countries, choose from the whole buffet, yes. Not just from the one. Okay, so his goal is to get out of Puerto Rico. He said, moving here, I no longer need to have a U.S. passport. And what else did he want to accomplish?
Well, it's the second passport for him and his family, and also find the kind of tax-friendly place that they could live, but that it's also kind of somewhere in South America, Latin America.
So we're replacing one Spanish-speaking tax-friendly place, but we're, again, opening up all those different options, and he wanted to move somewhere else and just kind of get the U.S. out so he could experience that. And obviously, if he lives in that country, he can decide, hey, I'm going to spend more time away, right?
Yes.
And not be stuck with that time in Puerto Rico.
Yes, that's true. I mean, if he goes to, let's say, one tax-friendly country, he has the option in 2-3 years to go to another one. He's not tied to that one country.
So his business is he's got a consultancy business, which can be run from anywhere.
Correct.
Any employees in the U.S. or Puerto Rico or any of that?
No employees.
So he moved down without any Act 22, Act 20
yes.
employees. Okay. marketing consultancy that's incorporated in Puerto Rico. So we're going to talk about how he undid that, because obviously you're not going to keep the company there. The family is him. He's got like a 10-year-old? He's
Yes.
45, child is like 10.
Yeah.
The mom is MIA.
Not in the picture, yeah.
And he's got a girlfriend.
Correct.
And she's Mexican.
Correct.
Now, is she also American?
No.
So one of the challenges, another reason for Puerto Rico is if you're single, I mean, obviously coming to the United States for most people in the world is difficult. If you've got we've had Mexican girlfriends. Are you going to marry her and get a green card so she can come to Puerto Rico with you? Because if not, maybe she'll get a U.S. visa, but she can't live with you. Was that part of the issue here? Like, were they together all the time?
Yes. I mean, it wasn't really, for her, it wasn't doable for her to be there long term. She was in some sort of a limbo with the U.S. immigration status. So they just decided to just drop everything and just make it easier on themselves.
Right. And obviously, I know during COVID, a lot of people had problems like with the vaccine requirements and stuff. Like just even if you wanted to do it, it was just laborious just to show you had it. And if you didn't want to do it, it's really hard. So so Puerto Rico, if you're already married to an American, easy enough. If you're not married, they're kind of in a long-term partnership, I guess. But she wasn't even able to be with him.
Not full time, yeah.
Which I would imagine if they wanted to live somewhere in Europe, they couldn't even prove they were cohabitating, right? Because they weren't. Okay. So those were the goals. But he's only American, so he needs a second passport. So walk me through kind of what we did for him.
Well, in terms of the second passport, again, one of the first things that we like to kind of determine is whether there's some ancestry that could be used. However, ancestry, for him particularly, he didn't have it, but also it does take a couple of years and he wanted to do it now. So we kind of figured out he wants his child to be included.
Because if you leave Puerto Rico, if you do this 3-year staging or whatever, he was there for 3 or 4 years?
Yeah.
So if you do this staging, you basically want to sell the stuff like your cryptocurrency businesses, whatever. You want to sell that before you leave Puerto Rico. So sell it and then expatriate and then go. You can't just like be in limbo for a year after leaving Puerto Rico. Therefore, he needed the passport now.
Correct.
Even if he could be Italian 4 years from now through his grandmother, wouldn't work.
Correct. So we had to kind of get that started before he actually left Puerto Rico physically. We were kind of discussing who will be involved. He wanted his child to be involved, and at that point, we did conclude that Antigua might be the best option for them.
Antigua and Barbuda is one of 5 Caribbean citizenship by investment programs. You make a donation, they give you citizenship. If you work with us, it takes how long did it take? Soup to nuts.
I would say approximately 3 months to get the approval, plus additional month or two to collect documents.
So, but 5 months.
Yes.
Antigua can be a little slower, so 3 months seems like a good outcome.
If the case is very straightforward, I would say that they do not take that much of a time. But if it is just a bit complicated, if you have one additional dependent, it takes a bit longer.
They're a little slower down there than Antigua. Okay, so we chose Antigua, where it's basically 4 for the price of 1 citizenship, $130,000. He doesn't have 4 for the price of 1, but he has 2 for the price of 1.
Correct. I mean, at this point, he decided they're just not ready to get married yet, so he's just going to include him and his child.
Right, so if he were to be married, he could add his then wife. This is a conversation we frequently have with people where it's like, you're not married. In the Caribbean and in most citizenship by investment programs, they don't deal with like common law cohabitating. It's you're married or you're not. Yeah. Is it worth being married, or is it worth, paying extra? And he chose to pay extra for her to get citizenship also?
No, actually, they did not get married.
They didn't get married. Is she getting Antigua citizenship also?
No, separately, no.
No, she's not getting, because she's Mexican.
Yeah.
So she can go anywhere else in Latin America. It's a strong passport, other than she needs a U.S. visa.
Correct. And later on, if he were to get married, he could add her to the citizenship.
And then what's that cost later?
I believe it's like $10,000, $15,000 donation.
Actually now it costs the donation part, yes.
Donation,
but actually, what happened recently is that even Antigua started something like I wouldn't call it a penalty, but if you add someone additionally to your application, you're actually the due diligence fee and the government.
They're going to do it again, yeah.
It costs a lot more than adding them in the first place.
But if you're planning on getting married in the future, you shouldn't wait to get your second citizenship necessarily just for that, because you can add them on. Like St. Lucia was actually not that hard. We've seen that one.
Exactly.
But Antigua's hard. Okay, fine. So we determined for him, he wants him and his child to have the same passport. The girlfriend's kind of a little bit over here, and she's got a Mexican passport, which people don't realize. A lot of Americans moving to Mexico. If you get that passport, you can't go to the U.S. and you can't go to Australia. Pretty much everywhere else, I mean, you're as welcome as anyone.
Yeah.
For residents or just as a tourist.
Yeah, it's a great passport. I mean, in the future, if they were to get married, he could also kind of fast track his way into a Mexican citizenship. So
In 2 years,
not
right.
get it immediately, but he can fast track it.
Now, and does she have any income in this situation?
No.
Because Mexico has an issue. If you leave Mexico as a tax resident, they kind of haunt you for several years.
Yeah.
But that wasn't a factor here.
No, she was not really kind of fully involved in the plan, and didn't really had a lot to do with the business. She wasn't really involved in the citizenship, so she was there like they wanted to live together, but everything else he was doing it on his own.
So in about 5 months, we were able to get him and his child Antiguan citizenship. The child apparently had a German mother,
Yeah.
but was not German citizen. The child was not German. Why didn't we suggest that?
We did suggest that, obviously, because it's, well, the German passport is a good passport, but they really didn't want to have it involved a mother, obviously,
Yeah.
getting the paperwork done from Germany and so on. They didn't really want.
Kid was born in the U.S.
Yes, and
Right.
they really didn't want to go through that.
We've seen this a number of times where people are like, all I have to do to get my Panamanian citizenship by descent is call my mother, and they're like, I'd rather not.
Yes.
I mean, from our side, we did tell them that if he were to get the German passport, the child could have the U.S. one, but no additional ones. So that was something that he did not want to do for his child. He wanted
Because Germany's more restrictive.
Correct. So he wanted his child to have options and have multiple passports in the future, not just be restricted to a U.S. one and a German one.
Right, and if the kid, now the U.S. Embassy won't generally let kids renounce. They
Yeah.
want you to be 18. So, but if you were to renounce the U.S. one, could the kid be German and something else, or you just
No,
be
just
German?
German.
They're looking at changing that, but
Hopefully.
it's being a little slow. Okay, so his goal was to renounce. We got the passport in 5 months. Did he immediately renounce?
Yes.
Okay, so how do we walk me through what we did to move that company out of Puerto Rico and close down the Puerto Rico residence? Because one thing people think is, whenever I want to leave a country, I just leave and kind of leave the baggage behind. You've got to clean that up first.
Absolutely. So when it comes to obviously the company, we were debating actually whether we should sell it, whether we should sell the company,
Sell it on paper.
Yes,
He's not actually going to sell it,
Of
but
course,
could you
yeah.
sell it to himself or something?
Yes, or just kind of close it and that's it. Now the capital gains tax, obviously in Puerto Rico under the Act 20 and 22, is capital gains are not taxable, right?
And just to be clear, they renamed it Act 6, they combined
Yes.
it as Act 60 now, but he did it the original one.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, luckily for him, he did establish a company when he came to Puerto Rico. So the company did not exist before he came to Puerto Rico.
Yes.
So he had set it up, it sounds like halfway decent coming into Puerto Rico.
Correct.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So then he decided what did he do?
sell. Yes, he decided to sell the business again on papers. To just sell it like that, which was actually pretty good because of his net worth at that moment. So he was quite close, obviously because of the renouncing, he was quite close to $2 million actually of a net worth.
That's one of the 3 criteria. If you're an
Yes.
American and you're going to renounce, you'd ideally like to be under $2 million. The other 2 are relatively manageable. And if you've been living in Puerto Rico, they should be very manageable.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, by the way, just because you have more than $2 million doesn't mean you owe an exit tax, which is, this is the trigger for the exit tax. That's the benefit, as you said, staging it in Puerto Rico for the first 3 years, to where if you were to sell it for $10 million, he would be liable for the exit tax, but as long as he sold it before he left Puerto Rico, there wouldn't be a tax. He sold it and moved it where?
He moved it to UAE.
To one of the free zones?
One of the free zones, yes. They will not live in UAE, so that was not the same. It's not the same jurisdiction. However, where they opted to go to, UAE is perfectly acceptable there, and it's when it's a free zone, it's still 0% tax.
So people think, oh, I heard the UAE has this 9% tax, not applying to the free zones. There's many different free zones. How do we choose which free zone to go to?
Well, that depends on the kind of industry and the business. So you need a business license in most cases in UAE, and every free zone is kind of specialized in a different area. So depending on what he's doing and what somebody else is doing, that would depend on where the company will be located in which free zone.
And some are like when you go to Dubai, you see like some of the sexy free zones in the middle of the city, like DIFC. That costs a heck of a lot more because it's designed for like, you're going to have an office like this and they're going to charge you a lot and it's going to be sexy. But if you're not going to be there, you don't need a fancy free zone.
Yeah.
Right. So did they choose to become residents of the UAE on paper? Because you don't have to live there to be a resident.
They didn't want to, but they
Yeah.
wanted to have an option in the future. So, I mean, if they keep the company, they might as well.
They'll be able to do that later.
Yeah.
But now they're not banking the UAE, so where's the company banking?
Well, I think
So when it comes to the banking on the, they wanted to have the access to obviously the U.S. banking system. So what we did is as well,
You set up like an additional part of the corporate structure to use the U.S. banking
Yes,
system.
exactly.
So I think it's generally a good idea to have your headquarters have a bank account. But people think, oh, I set up in the UAE. If you're not going to be a resident, which means you do need to show your face every once in a while, they're not going to open a bank account for your company.
correct. I mean,
So you can go to other banks that accept UAE free zones, but there aren't like that many in the world, are there? And they're kind of like, do you want to bank in some islands? It's like, no. We have a few U.S. banks though that will take, if you deposit $100,000, they'll take foreign corporations like Hong Kong, UAE, BVI. It's much more deposit than a U.S. company. So it depends. They chose to have, let's just have two parts to the structure.
So obviously they wanted to have access to the US banking system, but as well some bank accounts that were connected to the UAE company, of course. So with the UAE company, we opened a couple of bank accounts, you know, for example.
Small.
Yes, just small bank accounts as well. And the kind of, for example, the Dominica, we managed actually to open the bank account in the UAE, which was through the corporate one, which was through one of our vendors there. And we actually opened the corporate bank account at the Emirates and
Without the residents.
without the residents, but that's not very, it won't be accepted for everyone.
It kind of, I think his business was kind of like, all right, we kind of like that, fine.
Yes, exactly.
And so he's got a multi-part corporate structure, banking in the U.S. People think, oh, if I leave the U.S., if I don't live in the U.S., if I give up U.S. citizenship, I'm not allowed to bank in the United States. It's actually the opposite. There's maybe some U.S. banks that don't want you. But you know, if you're not living there, it's not like that's a tax nexus, they would say. Right? So for a Canadian, if you're living in Canada, or an Australian, you're probably going to be closing down those bank accounts. But for Americans, that's the one thing where it actually works in your favor a bit. Even if you give up your citizenship, if you have the right setup, you can bank in the U.S.
correct. I mean, that's a common...
Which means you can get paid in the U.S. for your marketing consulting services.
Yeah, that's a common misconception people have, that they have to sever all ties with the United States. And when they have customers from the United States, they're kind of on the fence on whether to proceed or not with severing ties in terms of renouncing.
Right.
However, with kind of a bit of a kind of more robust structure, a bit more robust banking, you have the option to keep those bank accounts.
We set up like billing companies and kind of subsidiaries and various entities, not just for the U.S. but around the world. Like we have Australians. Again, if you're leaving, Australia's the U.S. is the one good thing about the U.S. is they're less strict on how the banking affects your taxes. But if you're leaving Australia and you're shutting down your Australian company, sometimes we'll be like, okay, let's just have an Australian company so your customers will pay you.
Yeah.
You have services like Wise now, you can kind of do that, but for more robust customers, you may need a part of the corporate structure that doesn't like freak out your customers, like why am I sending money to an island?
Yeah.
And it's possible you don't have to do that. I mean, the headquarters can be somewhere, but then the billing can be somewhere else.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Just to add that when it comes to, especially when it comes to now personal bank accounts, he obviously as well wanted to have the bank accounts still in the US. There is, from the operational side, there is tons of work that you need to do to call each bank in the US and to check, because 50% of the bank will close your bank account once you're no longer US.
I think a lot of them don't really understand.
Exactly.
Right.
You're calling them, you know, we're on the phone with them.
We don't have a policy for this, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we're trying to explain, you know, that this person he will no longer be US citizen.
It just points, and by the way, there's some credit cards and banks that are like, we don't really care, give your social security number or whatever, okay, fine. But this is the kind of stuff you want to do if you're going to expatriate. Even before I expatriated, there were certain like online banks that didn't want me anymore because I just used it too much overseas. So okay, so we got the passport, he renounced. But before he renounced, we had to sell the company in Puerto Rico, which he could do at zero. But you've got to do it before you go.
Yes.
So you've got to time everything properly. Sold that, basically sold the assets to this new company he set up, and he's just kind of moving. He's paying himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now UAE owns it. Now he's got to move somewhere. He's got to clear out of Puerto Rico, because obviously you're renouncing from outside of the United States. So we were looking for a Latin American country. Not all of them are tax friendly. How did you find the right country to move?
So we kind of, they walked us through the requirements. One of them was to obviously have a nice weather. They wanted us to be Spanish speaking because his wife is Mexican, to be relatively close to Mexico so they can visit family, friends. So we kind of dabbled in a couple of places in Latin America and kind of landed on Costa Rica. Because they had, at that point, they wanted to purchase real estate, and Costa Rica had a option.
Investor program.
Correct, the investor program where you buy, and it was reduced at that point, and it's still reduced.
Was it 300,000? It went to 200,000.
It was 200,000, went to 150,000.
That's correct. It went to under 150.
Yeah.
And they spent, right, okay. And so they bought a house?
Yes, they bought a property there and then it kind of worked for them in that way. And we did manage to kind of, because they obviously weren't living full time together all the time, with Costa Rica, we kind of managed to get the common law partnership kind of valid
Really?
there. Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, she could have, as a Mexican citizen, just said, hey, I mean, she could have come on a different way where, hey, I make, what is it? You need to make a couple $1,000s a month.
Well, she didn't have an income.
But theoretically, she could have been employed by the companies. Once they're out of Puerto Rico, she could have been employed, but that would have taken, was it 6 months or 3 months you need to show it? And
6.
In some countries, don't care if you do that. In some countries, don't like that. So she was able to get, so in order to avoid that whole fracas, you guys decided, hey, let's just make you a common law partner.
Yeah, and it was a bit difficult, let me mention, because of the reason we mentioned earlier. So she was not able to actually live with him.
If they weren't really cohabitating.
Yes, exactly. So we had to provide like a lot of different proofs, let's say, that they were actually together for 10 years, because at that time
10 years?
It was a little bit less. It was approximately, I think, around 7 years. But still, if you're together for 7 years, I think it's easy to prove it. But it comes to taking pictures together, of, just your life.
Well, now you actually get to live together full time if you want and travel together. And I mean, a Mexican citizen can go anywhere in Latin America, I think. So they can travel. So are they going to live in Costa Rica full time?
Yes, that was their decision. Obviously, the child is 10 years old. They want some stability for that child. He goes to school. So obviously, finding a school was also important for them. I think the operations team kind of advised them.
You guys, we did a full report, I recall once, on like private schools in like 25 countries or something.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And just to add as well, for obviously in these reasons, in the situations like this one, again, English-speaking schools are obviously the most important one for them. Because
so they want to live in the Spanish-speaking but have English-speaking schools.
Yes, of course they can obviously, they're working on, especially here with the client's girlfriend being Mexican. She speaks Spanish, so of course but since he's 10 years old, he cannot have a gap in between, so he still needs to enroll in the school immediately. They
didn't have any problems that they're going as different country citizens, right? Sometimes you feel kind of weird, like, why am she Mexican? I mean, they were always different country citizens.
Yes.
But people get this idea that, like, well, now that I'm a Caribbean citizen, it's different or something.
No.
And so did they apply for residence as Antigua citizens, or they got it as Americans and then we flipped it?
Yes. Actually, we had to wait for them to get the Antigua citizenship.
And then we applied for Costa Rica.
Yes, and then we applied, yeah.
Costa Rica sometimes, I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine from 10 years ago, he was living there. It took him 3 years to get residence. If you don't know what you're doing, it really is slow. What do we do that makes it faster?
I would say that it's preparing everything. It's time management. Let's say it like that. So the first thing, yes, we could have waited for 5 months for them to get Antigua passport, and then it would take approximately another 5 months to actually collect everything, submit Costa Rica residency, and so on. It would take a year. But if you have everything prepared on time, if you were constantly working on, of course, calling the governmental institutions, calling resident immigration offices 24/7, they will eventually.
You think it's just a matter of, I think that people thought like, oh, it's Costa Rica, and they don't really take the application that seriously, and they kind of submit incomplete applications. There was an issue with expats 8-10 years ago, and then they would literally just sit there for 2 or 3 years.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And you could live there, but now you're not working towards citizenship. You're not really in there for like all the reasons you need.
I think it's also being familiar with the program. Obviously, we do one program 20, 30 times, and then we already know what are the pitfalls, what to look out for, and people don't when they get into it. And they're like, oh, but I need this document, but I need this apostille. So it's also kind of being familiar with what is actually needed.
At the same reason, we can say, hey, if Guatemala decides to be better than Costa Rica, we can tell people Guatemala works better because we're not only in Costa Rica saying, we've got to sell you Costa Rica, what's the best? So they're going to live there full time. Now, for example, what I like about Latin America, if you are nomadic, I'm in Colombia, not that much of the year, but their taxes, I understand, is pretty straightforward. There's one rule. Do I spend 183 days in Colombia? It's not, do you have a house and all these other rules that the more developed countries try and pull you in with, right?
Yeah.
It's one rule in a lot of these more emerging countries. So if you want to be nomadic, you could say, hey, I'm going to spend 2 weeks going back to visit family in the U.S. I'm going to spend 5.5 months in Colombia, 2 weeks on vacation, and 5.5 months in my other house. They didn't, and then you can you don't have any tax in any of them. But you're moving, and your kid's not in school.
Yeah.
So they wanted to be in one place.
They wanted to be in one place, and also for this particular country, the rule for tax residency is spending 6 months or more there,
So
183
it's just as easy. But in this case, he wants to be Costa Rican
Correct.
tax resident, right? Because he's got cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
So that's not. There's no capital gains on cryptocurrency there. Is that correct?
Well, it's territorial tax country. The crypto would be owned by the company
So
as
he
well.
had to put the crypto in the company.
Correct.
Right. People like, and this is a big issue with non-dom programs, territorial programs. I mean, crypto is kind of like, if it's in your hand, is it
Yeah.
really foreign?
Where
But
is it?
if you so you had to structure that. Tell me how that worked.
Well, first of all, he was able to sell kind of a portion of crypto while he was in Puerto Rico
To get the zero.
to get the zero. But however, he did earn a kind of a certain amount while he was a U.S. citizen still, so that would normally be taxed in the United
So
States.
before he came to Puerto Rico, it had already increased, and then so you kind of ring fence what's there when you're in Puerto Rico. He sold, he got that, but
Yeah.
he had the money. But wasn't he under $2 million? Therefore, the exit tax didn't kick. But he had the capital gains tax.
Correct.
He had deferred the capital gains tax by living in Puerto Rico. He sold, he got the zero on most of it,
But he had to pay on some other
which had been
portion.
deferred by living. Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. And then he was able to basically sell it to his foreign company.
Right. And then so once he paid the U.S. the chunk for when he lived in the mainland,
Correct.
which got deferred, he was able to sell it. Did we put it in the same UAE company? Because some people like to segregate it.
For him, yes, we put it all
He didn't
together.
care.
No.
Okay, so now that's an asset.
It
that-
wasn't really that significant amount of crypto. It was about $500,000. He does wanted to grow further, but right now it was kind of the most cost-efficient way to just segregate it.
He's trading stocks as well.
Yeah,
or
a
own
little bit,
stocks.
little bit, yeah.
bit. Are there dividends?
He's not getting any.
So Costa Rica's no treaty.
Yeah.
There's no tax treaty. So that as long as you don't have dividends, you're fine.
Yeah, he's just using it for the investment, reinvesting it. And,
No capital gains tax.
No.
Now, how much in stocks was there?
I think it was 100,000.
Because but people don't realize is that once you're no longer a U.S. citizen, anyone who's not a U.S. citizen, a U.S. taxpayer, U.S. situs assets are taxed for estate tax purposes, 60,000 and up. So if you're at 100,000, all right, maybe all right, fine.
Yeah.
Is he going to structure that into the foreign company as well to avoid the U.S. estate tax?
Yes, that was kind of our suggestion for phase 2. Once the portfolio grows a bit,
Right.
establish kind of a company in a low tax jurisdiction that's not very expensive to set up or expensive to kind of
You don't
maintain.
even really need a bank account.
Yeah, you don't need kind of a robust structure for that.
Right.
And then do it as a kind of a phase 2 to prepare for
That's
the
what I
future.
would do long term is say I'm going to have my business in the UAE, keep that clean, and then set up a company in some offshore jurisdiction that my brokerage account will take me, with Interactive Brokers, whatever, and then I just, they'll take that. It is more paper. You can tell we're doing that in my case right now, right? It's like pile it up high. But yeah, you could then move the crypto and the stocks into one, and then that way later he'll be protected. People don't realize, which you saying you told him, that you have the U.S. estate tax if you're not a U.S. taxpayer, and it starts at a tiny little exemption. It ain't
Correct.
$11 million.
Correct, and it's also kind of a big kind of surprise for U.S. citizens who want to renounce.
Big shock.
Yes.
We've had people who were like, they were never, remember that Egyptian guy that owned $8 million in real estate, and we're like, you're 80 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
If you die, it's like a $3 million chunk. They're just gonna,
Yes.
and it was like a $10,000 fix or something
Yes.
to
Well,
fix that.
I think it's very common that people don't know about that. Now,
And by the way, you call these brokerage accounts. I called one. They're like, that's a myth. I'm like, we have a little from the top tax attorney, international tax attorney in like black letter law, and so like that's an issue people face.
I love it honestly when lawyers just say, "Oh, that's not it's not true," because they are not familiar with
Well, this
it.
wasn't the lawyer. This
Yeah.
was the brokerage account, and you're
Well,
like, how do I
yes.
structure? I want to set up a company. They're like, you don't need to do that because we don't.
Well, it's easier for them to say no, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, they won't be paying the tax when it comes to. So if his portfolio now is not a big deal. If he had to pay some estate tax, it's not a huge chunk.
Yeah.
But as it grows, and there's no dividends, so Costa Rica works. There's no tax treaty. If you had huge dividends, you wouldn't be in Costa Rica.
Correct.
So Costa Rica is not going to tax the company either.
Correct. They have a territorial tax system. They don't have very kind of extensive permanent establishment rules, no control for incorporation rules. From that standpoint of view,
So the fact that he's living there doesn't really. It's just where's the company.
Yes.
Which is not true in many like a European jurisdiction or something.
Now, just to mention that if he decides, obviously, to get, for example, dividends from his company, if he remit that, obviously, to Costa Rica, that would be taxable.
Now let's come to my favorite discussion. which is I'm moving to a country, therefore I should move all my banking there. Costa Rican banking is also rather bureaucratic, right?
Yes, and obviously we did open one, but it was again because of the real estate that they purchased previously for paying the bills for day-to-day business and obviously transactions and so on. So we did open one bank account there, but it was purely for that.
Most countries you're going to move to, especially for lifestyle reasons, you're not going to, you will have a transactional bank account, but you're not going to like move a huge chunk of money. I mean, for me, I'm thinking, where am I? I mean, all the places where I have spent time, even now in Ireland, because of the tax rules, I don't keep a ton of money in any of those places. Maybe Malaysia's one, but generally speaking, you want to have the banking somewhere else. And if you're moving, it's a perfect opportunity to say, all right, get the little rinky-dink Costa Rican account, but where do we end up putting the banking?
We decided to actually, the first thing, because he was into crypto and obviously stocks and so on, we did decide to open one investment bank account.
So just a brokerage account?
Yes.
If you don't have much cash, you may not even need a lot of bank accounts.
Yes, exactly. So we decided obviously to focus as well on the investment part. We did open one bank account in Liechtenstein. We did open, we did open as well the brokerage accounts, yes.
But you got to switch it, by the way. Even if you have a brokerage account that works anywhere in the world, you'll ask them. They'll say, well, if you move to a new tax jurisdiction, you've got to do a reopening, and then we'll migrate your assets. So he's doing most of his assets are in the brokerage account. Liechtenstein, is he enjoying that Liechtenstein? They're a little bureaucratic also.
Yes, we decided to
imperious.
We decided to proceed with that bank account, but he said, let's try it out.
Yeah.
It turns out that he did keep the account.
Is that the crypto-friendly one?
Yes.
Yeah.
But we decided to as well open another one in Switzerland because he wanted to have it just in case. To use it both, and because again he was into obviously investments. So yeah, we at the end.
A lot of people who are in Latin America, they don't like the idea of having like a bank account in Asia. I would choose Singapore because I'm always in Europe or Asia, but it's kind of maybe you feel too disconnected.
Yes. Obviously, he didn't want to have everything in Latin America, of course, for the reasons we mentioned earlier. But if they have to choose, they would rather choose Europe.
Where is the hub for Europe for people in Latin America to put money? I always think like, okay, in Europe there's a number of hubs, but you could say Switzerland is the best known one. In Asia, it's Singapore is the biggest one. I mean, in Latin America, it's Miami. And you're saying, I mean, he is keeping a lot of the U.S. banking.
Yes.
But she didn't have to get rid of yelling at you to come.
Yeah, I mean, for him, another kind of issue to think about was that he was U.S. He wanted to renounce. So until he did renounce, a lot of options were not open to him, especially
like Liechtenstein.
Yeah, especially in good jurisdictions, crypto-friendly. So his options were limited.
That's the problem. You keep piling restrictions. I mean, I remember during COVID, I want no COVID restrictions. I want low tax. I want like this. I want that. And I'm like, great. There's 3 countries. So which is fine. I mean, hey, you're only going to go to 1 or 2. But yeah, I mean, when you're American, that rules out some options. And then when you have crypto, like it's all kind of chipping away at your options.
Yes. And also then if you don't want to put a lot of money in a bank.
That's the other one, right?
Yeah.
If you've got $1 million, then not a lot of options. But so ultimately, that's what he did. And so the brokerage now is offshore. And then he'll just kind of move later. We call it phase 2, where it's like, all right, you don't want to spend money to set up an extra foreign corporation now for these stocks, because if you were to die, get your 45, you get a tiny little estate tax bill.
Yeah.
Whatever, it's not worth it. I'll do it when it's 200,000. Is that it?
That's it, yeah.
We've given him some stuff that after he's working with you for a year, we'll check in with him and see where he's at.
Yes, exactly.
And he'll do it or not. So he's out of the U.S. He's out of Puerto Rico. No longer has the passport. What has been his experience traveling? Is he traveling that much at all? What has been experience traveling and living in Costa Rica as this kind of exotic citizen?
At the beginning, I think they really liked Costa Rica. They liked the nature, their real estate that they purchased. That obviously our real estate team was handling. The house was located in the woods.
We've had a bunch of real estate people in Costa Rica,
yes,
I guess. Yeah. We've scattered over the years.
Yes, and obviously, I mean, for this amount of money, you can buy actually something really something nice. It won't be, of course, luxurious or anything, but it would be nice. And the real estate they purchased was in the middle of the woods, and they kind of they were there for, I would say, maybe half a year that they didn't move from Costa Rica. They didn't went on vacation or anything. But obviously, we just recently talked with him just to check in to see how it is going. You know, is he enjoying Costa Rica? Is he maybe exploring some other options if he doesn't like it? They still like Costa Rica, but they're now using the time to travel a bit. Not just Latin America or anything, but just kind of Europe as well, just exploring things. In the meantime, they as well, just to add that in the meantime, at the beginning, actually, they didn't want for the wife for his girlfriend actually to be included in the application for Antigua, because the second citizenship was not that important to her. Just to mention that during the implementation, while we obviously worked with him, somewhere in the middle, he decided where there are some limitations in terms of traveling, visa-free travel, visa-free access, and so on.
For him?
No, actually, it was for her, because
Where were they wanted to go?
I think that they want to go to Russia at that time.
Mexicans can go to Russia, I think. Yeah, and these Caribbean citizenships, most of them can go to Russia.
Yes, but they decided in the middle that, you know, it's easier for them to have the same passport.
Passports.
Yes, so they still didn't want to get married, but there is obviously an option for him to sponsor her applications.
Here's my money, my due diligence, and then give it to her.
And we already have all the documents for him. It just had to be updated, right? So we just updated all the documents for.
So she would have been free if they were married, but he said, I'd rather pay the extra 130.
Yes.
Yeah, when I saw. You know, how long to get Costa Rican citizenship, and if they choose to live there you got to live there for a good chunk of the year.
Yeah, about 7 years to get the
It's 7 years,
passport, and you have to actually live there for 183 days.
It's not a backup plan.
Yeah, during the 7 years, yeah.
Yeah. So theoretically, you could have Costa Rica set up as a backup plan, and then not live there. I think you could just check in every once in a while, but not if you want citizenship.
Correct.
What are the things that they didn't realize? I saw Form 5471, for example, because he was, while in
Correct.
Puerto Rico, setting up. What were the things that he's like, I didn't realize that was a thing?
Well, first of all, as you mentioned, the Form 5471, which is for the foreign company, we did have to do things.
If for U.S. citizens.
Correct. We did have to do things at the same time. So we did establish the foreign company while he was in Puerto Rico, which is why he had to submit that kind of informational format.
People don't realize if you move to Puerto Rico, you still have all the F-bars and all the forms.
Correct.
I mean, it's great if you're only in Puerto Rico, but if you want assets out of the country, you're still a U.S. taxpayer.
So he did renounce mid-year. So there were kind of certain forms to file during the first part of the year while he was U.S., and then there were certain different forms to file while he was not a U.S. citizen.
Right. Obviously, if I'm a non-U.S. citizen and I own a UAE company, I don't have to file. I don't have to tell the U.S. But if I own, if I have certain other interests in the U.S., I have to report those. But did he end up having an exit tax when he left?
Luckily, no, we did manage to kind of get him under the $2 million.
Right.
There were some things he wasn't really aware of. He had a property in Puerto Rico, which was kind of worth a lot. And since it's kind of U.S. Territory and U.S. owned, we decided to just kind of gift it to his child.
So we had the tax professionals who handled
Correct.
all that, and that's what we do is kind of serve as the general contractor to let them do what they're good at. It was their tax advice that we just said, okay, hey, cool, we'll help you with the rest of it.
And I think that what helped as well is obviously the real estate purchase in Costa Rica, plus the investment, the donation for Antigua, which kind of, lowered it down a bit. Crypto was a bit tricky as well at that point because, well, you never know, it will go up and up.
That is the challenge when you own volatile assets.
So we did have really tight period to actually get him to renounce.
That's a good point. That's a challenge of just kind of doing this on your own. Is people do sometimes take 2 or 3 times as long, which you think, okay, what's an extra year? And if I spend a year and a half versus 6 months, you could trigger all kinds of things. Was there anything else that he was like, besides the U.S. situs, besides the form filing for the U.S. and non-U.S. entities, was there other stuff that he was like, I never would have thought of that?
Well, one thing he wasn't really aware of is that it would be preferable to sell the assets that he has in capital gains, realized capital gains while he's still in Puerto Rico.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's one thing he wasn't really aware of, which we really kind of push for it to happen because it will help him.
I love all these Puerto Rico guys. They're so great, and then they don't even tell you like some of the most basic stuff you're supposed to do. Okay, what were some of the challenges in implementing this besides some of the bureaucracy in Costa Rica?
I would say
we've got some great lawyers down in Costa Rica for years now. Yeah.
Yes, that's why I think that with Costa Rica it wasn't that challenging to really kind of to do that. But the challenging part was, I think, the moving part, because we obviously
physical moving.
Yes, Because we do obviously help them with the whole move, with relocating your car, your pets, or anything. This obviously they had a cat, so which we had to take care of to get the passport,
Microchips and all that.
yes, exactly, vaccines, and there's all sorts of certificates for the pet. So that was, I think, the trickiest part, because obviously they had the car as well to obviously move it from Puerto Rico to Costa Rica. The things, and I mean the furniture and everything, people think that that's easy, but the part where you have to coordinate between two, let's say, agency, let's call it like
Right.
that, one that would be in Puerto Rico, the other one that would accept it, that would be in Costa Rica, and then, for example, the moving containers or anything like that, where the furniture will be kept. That's the most tricky part, and it really involves you constantly working on it and constantly checking on where your things at,
Yeah.
Where's my couch?
We do a lot of moves, and pets too is a big one, but we do a lot of these moves where you've got to have these international moving companies and storage companies sometimes. Do they charge is there a duty in Costa Rica, like to bring in your car?
I believe so, yeah.
They say they had to pay a little something.
Yeah.
But that's easier, because like some places like Belize, I think you can bring a certain number of containers with you and they don't bother
Yeah,
you.
I mean, it's very rare for people to move to another place and just leave everything there or sell everything. We had maybe a couple of cases during these years where people just left everything or sold everything
That's
and just
pretty
started
much
from
me,
scratch.
but-
Yeah, that's pretty extreme, and not a lot of people do that.
We have guys with like 7 Ferraris sometimes. Like, I want to move all my Ferraris or something. And we have people sometimes where it's like if they have the 7 Ferraris in a country, that when they leave, it's like, well, if you keep the 7 Ferraris registered there, like that's a big no-no for tax.
Yeah.
So sometimes you've got to do something.
Either sell or move, yeah.
What other challenges besides the physical move did we have?
I think that when it comes to immigration part, the Antigua passport was as well a bit tricky. Obviously, the documents part was not that. Obviously, apart from the reasons on the validity date for some documents and how long the apostille takes, that is obviously necessary for Antigua and Barbuda citizenship. Apart from that, one of the issues was that we had to get the consent letter from his mother for the child.
For the child.
Yes, for the child, because if you're obviously if the child is minor, you have to get the consent for both parents. Obviously, he will go to get.
And she did that? Did you convince her to do it?
Yes, we actually convinced, but the communication was strictly with us. They didn't want to kind of communicate directly or anything.
good.
So yes, the communication was directly with us, and we actually had to find her as well because they didn't know. Where she's located exactly, the address, the email address, anything.
Oh,
So
my
it was
goodness.
quite a tricky
You're like a
process.
skip tracer now.
Yes.
One of the things that stood out to me, and we'll summarize here, when you make a donation for citizenship by investment, that also helps reduce a potential exit tax or other tax issues because you have less money now, right?
And let's not forget that he as well did sponsorship. So it's another donation that kind of brought it down below 2 million.
Yeah, that's also the donation that has to come from you personally. So not a business, not anywhere else, not any company. It has to come
Yeah.
from you personally and your money.
And that's what makes it a little bit harder for Americans. Sometimes you need to structure it properly. So the bottom line is he's running a business now, and we didn't even tell you. I think he's making, was it $1.3 million a year in this business? So it's a nice little chunk. He's got a little crypto, $500,000 in crypto, 100,000 in stocks. And he had a house, I guess, and now he sold in Puerto Rico, but in Costa Rica. So he's basically paying zero tax in the UAE. They're like, you're not here, you're in the free zone, we'll leave you alone. He's got a reasonable renewal cost for that. Living in Costa Rica full time, so he's got a good tax deal there. We'll isolate the US stuff later to protect him from future estate tax. Otherwise, in the crypto, he's good. It's like basically he's just 0, 0, 0 all the way across. If he wants to get Costa Rican citizenship, he and the child will be triple. They'll all be triple citizens eventually,
Yeah.
right? And if they give birth to a child together there, we had one client that they gave birth to their 4th child in Costa Rica. Now the child is born in Costa Rica.
Also can be Mexican.
Yes. Also.
And they could also do that. And he gets to, did we add him on to the Mexican residence, 2 years to citizenship?
If the child is Mexican, yeah.
No, did we add him on?
We can.
But he didn't do that.
No, not now.
No. But you'd have to live there in Mexico for the 2 years.
You would have to spend time, yeah.
Yeah.
It just fast tracks the number of years. It doesn't eliminate the physical presence
But then
requirement.
he's kind of stuck with Mexican tax, and then they follow you once you leave.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at when you're getting these citizenships where you have to be there. What's the tax consequence?
Yeah.
of spending the time. If you're making $1.3 million a year, I guess in Mexico there's some ways to be kind of like, I don't really live here.
Off the grid, yeah.
Right? No, but legally though, I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's some ways like, I don't have this, this, or this, and maybe he would do that, but it's so grainy there, right?
It is kind of a gray area.
It's never like exactly, yes, you won't pay. It's like, we think you won't pay.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, for kind of to be straightforward, just better to not get.
So there's an
involved in
example of
that.
where sometimes you're like, well, what if I can get this citizenship for free? It's like, number one, he wants to get out of the U.S. right now. He's tired of living in Puerto Rico to keep the low taxes in the U.S. So therefore, it's like he spends the $130,000 plus some fees for our side and the government side, and he therefore does not have to live in Mexico and potentially pay $1 million in taxes in those 2 years.
Correct. I mean, obviously, Puerto Rico is somewhat tax beneficial. He had the 4% tax rate. He paid some tax on salary.
Right. 60 grand a year or something probably total.
Yeah. However, I mean, with this, the primary goal was not just kind of tax saving. It's also just kind of getting
Lifestyle.
kind of being free from the United States, the restrictions, the reporting. Yes,
and having to live in Puerto
living,
Rico.
yeah, having to live in one place, being stuck there, yeah.
Costa Rica ain't that cheap, but I bet it's cheaper than what he was doing. So he's going to save $60,000-ish in taxes that he was paying in Puerto Rico. Now he's paying zero in Costa Rica. And so, I mean, basically he pays for his passport in 2 years. So it's kind of like one facilitates the other. This is how it all kind of works together. You have to figure out, how does when I say how does the puzzle fit together? Thank you, Yelena. Thank you, Arena. This is the puzzle you've got to fit together. What are the things that you're not aware of? The unknown unknowns. Okay, people think, I did my research, I read some blogs. Unknown unknowns. Are there things you qualify for that you're not aware of? Are there things you have to do that you're not aware of? Are there challenges that you're going to face? So here's a guy who's saving not a ton of tax every year because he already had a decent setup, but he got his freedom back. He's now made sure that he can live wherever he wants, totally tax-free, get a second and third passport, get everybody in the same place, importantly. And so a great success story of someone whose life is now a lot less burdensome because he chose to go where he's treated best.